Welcome to Grace Fellowship Baptist Church Wednesday evening Bible study for Wednesday, July 28th, 2021. Tonight is Saturday, July 24th, 2021, and tonight we start the book of Judges. It is, in one sense, a continuation of the book of Joshua. It's a continuation of the story of how God's people conquer the land. But it's the flip side to Joshua. Joshua, everything's great and victorious, and they win, and everybody obeys, and everything goes well for them. Judges is almost the opposite story. They rebel, they break his commandments, and God punishes them over and over and over. But to properly understand Joshua, we do have to understand, go back actually to Exodus. I'm going to read parts of chapter 23 of Exodus. Chapter 34 says almost the same thing again. God really meant it. He said it twice and recorded it. Exodus chapter 23, verse 20. This is God speaking to Moses on the mountain. So in the chapter 34 is very similar. It's God speaking to Moses on the mountain the second time after he broke the first set of 10 commandments because the people were sinning. Anyway, this is God speaking to Moses. See, I am sending an angel ahead of you to guard you along the way and will bring you to the place I have prepared. Pay attention to him and listen to what he says. Do not rebel against him. He will not forgive your rebellion, since my name is in him. If you listen carefully to what he says and do all that I say, I will be an enemy to your enemies and oppose those who oppose you. My angel will go ahead of you and bring you into the land of the Amorites, Hittites, Perizzites, Canaanites, Hivites, and Jebusites. I will wipe them out. Do not bow down before their gods or worship them or follow their practices. You must demolish them and break their sacred stones to pieces. Worship the Lord your God, and his blessing will be on your food and water. I will take away sickness from among you, and none will miscarry or be barren in your land. I will give you a full lifespan. I will send my terror ahead of you and throw into confusion every nation you encounter. I will make all your enemies turn their backs and run. I will send the hornet ahead of you to drive out the Hittites, Canaanites, and Hivites out of your way. But I will not drive them out in a single year, because the land would become desolate and the wild beasts too numerous for you. Little by little I will drive them out before you until you have increased enough to take possession of the land. I will establish your borders from the Red Sea to the Sea of the Philistines, and from the desert to the river. I will hand over to you the people who live in the land, and you will drive them out before you. Do not make a covenant with them or with their gods. Do not let them live in your land, or they will cause you to sin against me, because the worship of their gods will certainly be a snare to you. And of course, Joshua, at the end of Joshua, had the people covenant again with God and agree to obey his laws. And Judges chapter 1, verse 1. After the death of Joshua, the Israelites asked the Lord, "Who will be the first to go up and fight for us against the Canaanites?" The Lord answered, "Judah is to go. I have given the land into their hands." Then the men of Judah said to the Simonites, their brothers, "Come up with us into the territory allotted to us and to fight against the Canaanites. We in turn will go fight with you into yours." So the Simonites went with them. When Judah attacked, the Lord gave the Canaanites and Perizzites into their hands, and they struck down 10,000 men at Bezek. It was there they found Adoni-Bezek and fought against him, putting to rout the Canaanites and Perizzites. Adoni-Bezek fled, but they chased him and caught him and cut off his thumbs and big toes. Then Adoni-Bezek said, 70 kings with their thumbs and big toes cut off have have picked up scraps under my table. Now God has paid me back for what I did to them. They brought him to Jerusalem, and he died there. The men of Judah attacked Jerusalem and took it. They put the city to the sword and set it on fire. After that, the men of Judah went down to fight against the Canaanites living in the hill country, the Negev, and the western foothills. They advanced against the Canaanites living in Hebron, formerly called Kiriath Arba, and defeated Sheshaiah, Ahiman, and Talmai. From there, they advanced against the people living in Debar, formerly called Kerith Shephar, and Caleb said, I will give my daughter Aksa in marriage to the man who attacks and captures Kerith Shephar. Othniel, the son of Kenaz, Caleb's younger brother, took it, so Caleb gave his daughter Aksa to him in marriage. One day when she came to Othniel, she urged him to ask her father for a field. When she got off her donkey, Caleb asked her, What can I do for you? She replied, Do me a special favor. Since you have given me land in the Negev, give me also springs of water. Then Caleb gave her the upper and lower springs. I'm going to stop there for a moment. We're going to... Some of this territory is some of the same territory that the Joshua conquered in the southern campaign, the first campaign after the end of the land. When they attacked Jerusalem, it had Jebusites in it. Now it has Canaanites in it. The people of Israel did not occupy Jerusalem, and so they had to conquer it again. Later, we're going to find it has Jebusites back in it. Jerusalem has been handed back and forth by war multiple times throughout history. It apparently started way before this time. In fact, when Abraham goes there and talks to the king of Salem, it was known as Salem at the time. It was not in the hand of the Jebusites. The Jebusites got it later and named it Jerusalem, added their name to Salem, and it stuck. But the men of Judah, they're going to clear out some more people out of their land and get some more land. And they want some allies. And so they ask the Simonites to go with them and promise that they're going to go help the Simonites in their territory. So they're making alliances. This shows something that we know from the rest of the book of Judges to be true. Israel was not functioning as one nation. It was actually acting as a bunch of tribes, at least 13. The 12 named tribes plus Levi, they worshipped one God, nominally at least. And theoretically, everybody went to Shiloh, to the tabernacle there, and worshipped at every one of the feasts. We know from good archaeological evidence and from part of what the judges say, that practice was spotty at best. We never find any evidence that huge crowds descended on Shiloh at any point in time. We do find evidence that people went up to Shiloh to worship, and there was a pretty much continual animal sacrifice going on there. So the priests were maintaining worshiping Yahweh there. But not everybody went and did Passover at the same time or something, or not everybody went there to celebrate Passover. They celebrated Passover in their own hometown, their own house or whatever. We don't really know there's no record of what they did, but they were not doing what Moses had told them to do, because Moses told them every male is supposed to go to the tabernacle every year for Passover and 2 other feasts. And it's pretty evident they weren't all going up to Shiloh every year. Some may have gone. Some may have gone every year. Some may have gone occasionally. Some clans in the tribes may have gone. This year, A, D, G, and M are going to go, and next year B, E, H, and N, etc. And everybody gets to go every so many years. We just don't know. It's evident from the book of Judges that a lot of people didn't worship routinely. And they just, lived on their land. They made use of the land. They acknowledged that God gave it to them. And the leadership may have nominally worshipped God, but the practice was much different. Anyway, we have just bits and pieces of the tale. Of course, the Simonites had been assigned territory in the north part of the kingdom, but because they couldn't conquer it first, they got allowed to live in part of Judah's territory, and they helped conquer it and got land there. So, it's a logical choice for the people of Judah to ask them, the people that are living in their territory, to help them conquer more territory. And then promise in turn, hey, we'll help you conquer your territory so you can have real land instead of just borrowing ours. Struck down 10,000 men. That's actually a pretty huge army for that day and time. Evidence is up until the Israelites got into Canaan, most armies were on the size of a few hundred at most for large armies. Some smaller cities may have had a dozen soldiers. For a standing army. In a time of war, they would press into service every male in the society to do something, but trained for battle, not that many. Of course, they might be facing an army that also had 50 people in it. So, a dozen men with, 200 men reinforcing them may be a sufficient army, particularly when you're hiding behind a wall. So they were now encountering more organized resistance, and God still blessed them. 10,000 men. Now, Judah and Simon each had upwards of 50,000 to 80,000 men when they entered Canaan. So, they could have fielded, 150,000 men. Probably didn't field that many soldiers, but, they probably had an excessive large army. So 10,000 men, but, they're now facing professional armies that have begun to train and know that they're fighting for their life. And, 10,000 men organized. Huge army for that day and time. At this point in time in history, basically only the Egyptians and the Hittites fielded armies that large in that part of the world. And they normally didn't put everybody on the field at the same time. They normally only did a few thousand at the time. Kept some of them at home for reserves and whatever. Didn't make everybody march everywhere. The first king they came up and attacked, kind of interesting. his city was Bezek, and he was Adonai Bezek. Adonai meant Lord. So he was claiming he was the Lord of Bezek. And when we translate it into English as Lord, we kind of miss some of the meaning there. He's actually claiming to be divine, the not only the master, which is what Lord would probably translate into English better as, but he was claiming a divine authority over his city, and claiming to be a king. And he's apparently been very successful at conquering other places. You know, he claims to have had 70 kings conquered, and cut off their thumbs and big toes, and made them scramble for scraps under his table without being able to use a pincher grip, pick up food without your thumb. You can't walk very well without a big toe. He was a cruel man. Thing is, this is also a sign that they did to him what he'd done to everybody else. The problem is, that's not what God told them to do. God told them to kill him. And here they just maimed him, tortured him in the same way he tortured other people. They're beginning to adopt the practices of the land. Even when God still gives them success, they didn't worship the other gods. They destroyed them. They cleared the people out of the land, everything that God told them to do. But instead of killing the king, they let him live. And sent him to an opposition city to let him live out his life, and he died there. And then they went and conquered that city. No. That's not what God told them to do. They conquered Jerusalem and burned it. It was in a favorable spot, and it gets rebuilt, and we're going to find throughout the book of Judges that Jerusalem becomes a target again and again that they have to deal with. Anyway, they conquered throughout the territory of Judah, fought against the Canaanites there, in the hill country, which is the north part of their territory, Negev, the south part, and the western foothills. They conquered Hebron again, which tells us that just like God had told Moses, not all the people were out of the land, and they'd come back from being refugees somewhere and re-inhabited their land because the Israelites didn't live in it and didn't keep it, or maybe had run them out or something. We don't know exactly what the history. They advanced against Debar again. This time, some of the men that had been with Joshua, Caleb and his family, his clan, they conquered it, and Caleb says, enough of this, we're keeping it conquered, and he gave it to his relatives and said, y'all live here. He's the guy that said, we can conquer this land. And he gives his daughter to his nephew in marriage. This was within the law of Moses. It was not a person so closely related that he couldn't give her in marriage. It was allowed in the law of Moses. And so he was not violating anything. In fact, in that day and time, most marriages were within the clan. So you would end up marrying, second cousins or third cousins or whatever, um, people that are related to you. And very often, when you intertwine that for several generations, you might be marrying somebody that's a second or third cousin, but their parents were second or third cousins, and their grandparents were second or third cousins, and so on far. And if you start looking back at that, um, people were a lot more related than you thought they would think they would be. Um, it was a very clannish society, and not many people married outside the clan. If they did, it tended to be the woman left her clan and went to a new one. So, there's lots of things going on there. And when he's saying, when the daughter asks for land, he'd given her a good chunk of land. It's a huge chunk of land, really. But it was basically only fit for herding sheep, not fit for gardening, not fit for growing crops on. And you could make a living growing sheep, but it would not be a prosperous living. And it would be a long time before the people figured out how to live on it very profitably. She can live there, and he's given her enough that the family can do well. But she also knows that prosperity will come with water. So she asks for a favor that she be given springs, and so that they have a source of water. This will allow them to grow crops near the house, allow them to water their animals, and allow them to do things more profitably. And so he grants it. Now, the thing is, to grant this, somebody has to go out and kill the natives that are living there. This is not like he's going out into territory that nobody lives on, nobody has any houses on, and going, sure, yeah, let's draw the lines differently, and here, you can have this piece. She's asking him to go to war and kill people and take their land and then give her the land. Now, he also recognizes that if he blesses his daughter, let's face it, that's going to bless his grandchildren and all of his descendants down her line for the rest of time. He's wanting her to prosper. So sure, honey, we'll go clear some more land for you. We haven't conquered the springs yet. We want to give you the springs. And he basically gives her a wedding gift of some springs of water. The big set of country that he gave her husband was for basically going in and conquering it. And she asked for the chance to be prosperous in the future. And he does. And verse 16. The descendants of Moses' father-in-law, the Kenite, went up from the city of palms with their men of Judah to live among the people of the desert of Judah in the Negev near Arad. So Moses' father-in-law's people had become part of the Israelites. They had been worshiping Yahweh. And they found this big group of people that were blessed by Yahweh. Now, they were related by blood to a lot of the people that the Israelites fought. The Midianites and Ishmaelites, and that was their people. But those people didn't worship Yahweh. And so they sided with the people of Yahweh. And they had been living among the Israelites the whole time. And so they got an inheritance with the Israelites. They're a distinct clan still, right now. this is one of the last times we hear about them because they apparently intermarry with the Israelites and just kind of breed away. Um, but they're allied with Judah. And by the way, the city of palms is Jericho, and went to live among the desert of Judah in the Negev toward Arad. Um, so they're going back to the kind of territory they were used to living in the Sinai desert. Um, they were used to being herdsmen, and because Moses was a herdsman for his father-in-law for 40 years, and so he's they're going back to the kind of ecological situation they're used to living in. They've seen the land, they understand the promise of it. They're siding with God's people. They're going to worship Yahweh, just like the Israelites do. But they want to go back to land that feels comfortable to them, that they know how to work in and how to graze sheep in. And somebody needs to raise sheep. And so they settle in that part of the land. Arad, by the way, is the very southern tip of the land of Judah. So they're living in the very southern part, very close to the land they used to live in. I wouldn't be surprised if they crossed the border occasionally and went out to their old territory. But they allied themselves with the Israelites, and so they lived there with them. They probably spent a lot of time out in the desert, being Bedouins, essentially. That's what they were before. Verse 17. The men of Judah went with the Simonites, their brothers, and attacked the Canaanites living in Zephath, and they totally destroyed the city. Therefore it is called Hormah. The men of Judah also took Gaza, Ashkelon, and Ekron, each city with its territory. So they're now fulfilling their promise. They're going with Simonites and helping the Simonites conquer territory. And they destroyed the city, renamed it. They took 3 of the Philistine cities. We're going to find them back in Philistine hands later. It becomes a continual battleground through there between the Philistines and men of Judah. And depends upon exactly what's going on. But at this point in time, they're still worshiping Yahweh, still obeying God, haven't compromised with the other gods, other than this king of Bezek, Adonai Bezek. They haven't compromised with anything. And so God's still giving them success in battle. And they've taken 3 of the 5 Philistine cities. They were walled cities. They were not easy to conquer. And they won. And they took his territory. Verse 19. The Lord was with them, the men of Judah. They took possession of the hill country, but they were unable to drive the people from the plains because they had iron chariots. As Moses had promised, Hebron was given to Caleb, who drove from it the 3 sons of Anak. The Benjamites, however, failed to dislodge the Jebusites who were living in Jerusalem. To this day, the Jebusites lived there with the Benjamites. So the Benjamites did not conquer Jerusalem completely. They drove the Canaanites out, and the Jebusites came back. And they didn't drive the Jebusites out. We're beginning to see how things are going. It's a chaotic situation. There's no overall general. each tribe is doing their own thing. Um, Judah and Simon allying together to help each other is apparently one of the few times this happens. Each tribe is trying to conquer its own land for itself and not share and not expected to help anybody else. Um, and consequently causes problems. They can't, it's hard to do it on your own. If they had done it as a nation, um, gotten together and goes, okay, this year we're going to go help the Simonites. Everybody's going to come help the Simonites. And then next spring it'll be, Issachar's time and we'll go help them. And the next spring it'll be Naphtali's turn and we'll go help them. They could have made a lot of progress very quickly. Overwhelming numbers, and they probably could have conquered Jerusalem and held it. And if the people started to try to infiltrate back and attack back, bring the whole army up and wipe somebody else's army out and go take their territory. But that's not the way they did it. Each tribe tried to do its own thing, and so Benjamin couldn't hold Jerusalem. Judah conquered Jerusalem, drove out the Canaanites. And then the next time we hear about it, a few verses later, Benjamin is living with the Jebusites there because they couldn't drive the Jebusites out of Jerusalem. It was an empty city just a few verses ago. Yeah, that's what happens when you fracture and you're not united. Verse 22. Now the house of Joseph attacked Bethel, and the Lord was with him. And they sent men to spy out Bethel, formerly called Luz. And the spies saw a man coming out of the city, and they said to him, show us how to get into the city, and we will see that you are treated well. So he showed them, and they put the city to the sword, but spared the man and his whole family. He then went to the land of the Hittites, where he built a city and called it Luz, which is the name to this day. Now, this was what they were not supposed to do. They weren't supposed to make a treaty with anybody. The city of Luz later becomes a thorn in the side of Joseph. And this point in time in Judges, it's called the tribe of Joseph. Means Manasseh and Ephraim were still cooperating together. They recognized that they were blood kin more than the other tribes were because they were both sons of Joseph. And so apparently this was another military alliance between two tribes, but it was more like they were part of a super tribe. They were one super tribe instead of two separate tribes. Through the whole leadership of Moses, they were two separate tribes. When they get into the land, at least for right now, they're acting like one super tribe. And then later we're going to find them acting as separate tribes again. It's not going to do them well. The more they fragment, the more they're going to compromise, the more they're going to not wipe the people of the land out. And at this point, they basically make a treaty with a single man, and they go wipe out all his they allow him and his relatives to live, and they wipe out the rest of the city. He, of course, goes away as a refugee, builds a new city, and names it the same as the old city, and they rename the city Hebron. That had been the name that Abraham had given it. So there's a lot of that kind of thing going on. Old place names come back, and new place names are displaced. And the thing is, Hebron had been named Luz before it was named Hebron. So it was Luz, it's Hebron, Luz, now it's Hebron again. It says something about who was living there. Luz comes from a different language group than Hebron does. So people of a different language group, instead of the Seminite languages that came out of the land of Shinar. Um, Luz was from an Indo-European language, so it came out of the north, out of the Hittites or some of their associated tribes. And so we can find, the land of Canaan is used to this constant warfare and people groups displacing other people groups in certain places. The Israelites coming in did it in a different way. Instead of a continual rotation, we're going to advance on this front, and somebody's chasing us on that front, and so we're just going to go conquer this group of people, and they're going to get our old land, we're going to get this new land. The Israelites had the concept, we're conquering this land, we're going to occupy it. If somebody drives us out, we're going to drive them out eventually again. We're going to conquer it back. They weren't willing to totally give up. They might give up for a short time, for a generation or something. But they were going to plan to conquer it all eventually, like Moses had told them to. And so they're in the process of that. Verse 27, but Manasseh did not drive out the people of Bethshan or Taanach or Dor or Ibleam or Middo and their surrounding settlements, for the Canaanites were determined to live in that land. So, 5 verses after Joseph is identified as a tribe, Manasseh is a tribe. This kind of tells you how disorganized things work. Sometimes they work together, sometimes they don't. And that does, that half-hearted approach to conquering the land is what left the people that had evil worship practices in the land. And they would eventually compromise with them. Manasseh didn't drive out some of the bigger places. So they're living out in the farmland and in small towns, and the big cities are still occupied by Canaanites. Well, guess who has dominant influence? The people in the city or the people in the country? Just look around you. Who has influence in our land today? Do politicians go out to Deweyville to seek influence, or do they come to Houston? Do they go to, Weatherford, or do they go to Fort Worth? The cities not being conquered means the Canaanites had the upper hand. They were the people of influence. Verse 28, when Israel became strong, they pressed the Canaanites in forced labor, but never drove them out completely. So they failed to do what Moses told them to do, conquer them, kill them. When they became stronger, they enslaved them. Guess what enslaved peoples do? They bring their worship with them. They don't go immediately and go, we're going to worship our new captors. No, gods. No. They take their gods with them. Okay, we're at least alive. We're still worshiping the same gods, same practices. And the Israelites get to see those practices and get ensnared by them. Verse 29, nor did Ephraim drive out the Canaanites living at Gezer, but the Canaanites continue to live there among them. So they're intermingling with the people, exactly what Moses told them not to do. Verse 30, neither did the Zebulun drive out the Canaanites living in Kitron or Nahalal, who remained there, but they did subject them to forced labor. Nor did Asher drive out those living in Akko or Sidon, or Halab, or Akzib, or Helban, or Ephek or Rehob. Because of this, the people of Asher lived among the Canaanite inhabitants of the land. Again, they lived among them instead of conquering them and driving them out. Judah, at least, if they didn't kill everybody, they drove them out of this piece and they occupied that piece and they stayed pure. These other tribes, they're going, we've been allotted it, we're going to live in it. There's people living here, we got neighbors. No, no, no. Don't compromise. But they compromised. Verse 33, neither did the Naphtali drive out those living in Beth Shemesh or Beth Anath, but the Naphtalites too lived among the Canaanite inhabitants of the land, and those living in Beth Shemesh and Beth Anath became forced laborers for them. The Amorites confined the Danites to the hill country, not allowing them to come down into the plain. At least the Danites, they had their own land. They couldn't conquer the plains, but they held the hill country. There was a line of demarcation between them. So the Danites, in one sense, were better off. They weren't living among the people God said wipe out and don't intermarry with them and don't practice their religious practices. They knew they were the enemy. Verse 35, and the Amorites were determined also to hold on to Mount Heres, Aijalon, and Shaalbim. But when the power of the house of Joseph increased, they too were pressed into forced labor. The boundary of the Amorites was from the Scorpion Pass to Selah and beyond. So the people, even when they were still obeying God, worshiping God, weren't doing what he told them to do, weren't wiping the people out of the land, and they were interspersing themselves among the people, other people. The thing is, the other people in the land, they were kind of used to that. It was part of the culture is, okay, if somebody's trying to conquer, if they kill the family next door, they can have that piece of land, but I'm going to defend my piece of land, and then I got new neighbors. And maybe I can get along with them. And the people of the land weren't pure. And, okay, new neighbor, hey, come worship my God, I'll come worship your God. We're all polytheists. We don't know how many gods there really are, so, I'll add your gods to my gods, and you can add my gods to your gods, and, if we can get along, I'll let my sons marry your daughters, and you can let your sons marry my daughters, and we'll all be one people, right? And be all happy. And that's exactly what God told them not to do. So this sets up the book of Judges. Certain tribes were compromising with the people of the land and putting them to forced labor. They needed slaves more than they needed. No, you don't. They're going to teach you to worship their gods. You needed to worship Yahweh and do it his way. After you conquered the land and killed them all, you need to go into your wife and have a big family and have a bunch of kids and let them live on the land and let them farm it with you and have more kids and fill the land. That's what God told you to do. Be fruitful and multiply. Fill the land. Not get a bunch of slaves from the locals. Because guess what? What's going to happen? Some of the locals are going to band together and take some of the Israelites as slaves. Yeah, that happened too. Thing is, they didn't think they were compromising. It wasn't big compromise. We need laborers. Yeah, it was. It was convenient for the moment to have laborers. But they were going to get you off track, and they were going to lead you away from worshiping Yahweh. And they were going to, because of that, they were also going to reduce the imperative to conquer more land and drive more of the heathens out. Because, well, now those heathens that are my slaves, they got relatives living on the farm next door. And they grow more pomegranates than I do, and I grow more grapes, so it's good economy for me to trade pomegranates for grapes. It's not what you were supposed to do. Gracious Lord, help us to be people who realize how compromised we are with our culture and how our culture is opposed to you, even deny that you exist, and help us to separate ourselves out and take that mentality that we are to be spiritual conquerors and to take back culture and take back land by telling people about you instead of compromising and going, well, this won't hurt much, so let's do that. Lord, help us to be uncompromising, dedicated to you, worshiping you and you alone, and living for you and you alone, lifting you up high as holy, as the ultimate Lord of Lords and King of Kings, the ultimate Master of the universe, and that you would draw them into yourself and help us to be seen as separate and holy and distinguished. Have us to honor you. Have us to not compromise like the tribes did, where they lived and intermingled with the people and accepted them slaves. Have us to be more like the men of Judah, who conquered land and held it and stayed pure. Lord, we, I'm afraid, are impure people ourselves. Have us humble ourselves, pray, seek your face, and turn from our evil way, that we would obey you and follow you wholeheartedly. In your gracious name, amen. Hope to see you Wednesday night at the Bible study at church. If not, I'll see you here next week on this channel. Have a good week.